I saw hell with my own eyes. I know what it's like to be in the darkest and most despairing place, where the screams of condemned souls echo endlessly. There, I understood the weight of all my wrong choices, and how I had strayed from God, living a life of vanity and excess. Hell is not just a place of fire and darkness. It is a total absence of peace, a void where despair is so dense it feels suffocating. I saw faces marked by eternal suffering, screams that never stopped, and a darkness heavier than any human burden. I am not here to scare you with my testimony. My goal is different. I want you to see that even in the darkest moments there is a way out, a light, and that light comes from God. I was born in a small village in Spain into a humble yet value-rich family. My name is Elena Martinez, and I am the youngest of 4 siblings. Our home was modest, with whitewashed walls and a garden where my mother grew flowers that scented the mornings. Despite our modesty, there was always an abundance of love. My mother, Doña Carmen, was a woman of unshakable faith. Every night before bed, she would gather the family to pray together. "Gratitude is the key to pleasing God," she would say with a gentle smile while stroking my head. My father, Miguel, was an honest worker who taught us the importance of effort and dignity in everything we did. "Honest work is the greatest legacy a man can leave his children," he often said, as his calloused hands prepared the soil for planting. I remember Sundays when we would go to Mass at the small village church. It was a sacred ritual for us. I loved watching the colorful stained glass windows reflecting the sunlight and listening to the hymns echoing through the hall. At that time, my heart was full of faith and innocence. Even with little, my mother always found ways to help others. Many times, I saw her share what we had with neighbors in need. "Loving your neighbor is the greatest wealth we can offer," she would say. These teachings deeply marked my childhood and shaped my worldview. I was a girl full of dreams. I loved playing in the fields, reading adventure books, and imagining that one day I would explore the world beyond the village. But above all, I felt that my life had a purpose. I grew up believing that God was always with me, guiding my steps and protecting my family. In those days, I never imagined that I would stray from that love that filled my life. But as the years passed, the allure of the world began to draw me in ways I was not prepared to resist. I had no idea that the values that seemed so unshakable would be tested in ways I could never have imagined. It all began on an ordinary day while helping my mother at the village square. She sold sweets and flowers we grew at home to supplement the family income. The sweet aroma of roses mingled with the sounds of children playing and merchants shouting their offers. I was distracted, arranging the basket of flowers, when I felt someone approach. "You have a face the cameras would love to capture," said a tall man, elegantly dressed with a confident smile that seemed to brighten the surroundings. He introduced himself as Javier, a modeling agent searching for new talent. Confused, I looked at my mother, who immediately frowned with suspicion. "My daughter doesn't need such things. We are a simple family and have everything we need," my mother replied firmly, placing her hand on my shoulder as if to shield me from the stranger. Despite her resistance, something inside me awakened at that moment. The idea of leaving the village, exploring the world, and perhaps providing a better life for my family seemed like an impossible dream. While Javier spoke of opportunities, runways, and magazines, I couldn't help but imagine the brilliant future he was painting. My mother, however, was unconvinced. "Don't let yourself be carried away by empty promises, Elena. The easy path is not always the right one," she often said, trying to make me see beyond the charm of those words. But my curiosity was stronger. I didn't want to spend my entire life in a village, planting flowers and selling sweets. I wanted something more, something grand. After days of pleading, I managed to convince my mother to let me attend a photo shoot in a nearby city. She reluctantly agreed, but on one condition. Never forget who you are and where you came from, Elena. The world may be tempting, but your essence is what truly matters. That afternoon, as I prepared for the session, I felt a mix of anxiety and excitement. I had no idea that this simple invitation would be the gateway to a world that would change my life in ways I could never imagine. My first photo shoot marked the beginning of my transformation. The photographer, impressed by my natural beauty and ability to follow directions, showered me with praise. "You were born for this, Elena," he said as he reviewed the images. Before long, more invitations started to arrive. First, modest fashion shows in local stores. Then campaigns for well-known regional clothing brands. Each new job seemed to push me closer to something bigger. My face quickly became familiar in catalogs and shop windows. With that came contacts, travel, and opportunities that seemed endless. Before I knew it, my name was being mentioned in the most important circles of the fashion industry. The transition felt like a dream. From the small village square, I found myself in luxury hotels and posing for prestigious magazines. What once seemed like an unattainable world was now part of my routine. Designers praised my elegance on the runway, and photographers competed for the chance to have me in front of their lenses. I remember the first time I entered an exclusive party. The sparkle of jewelry, the expensive dresses, and the fake smiles left me awestruck. Having grown up in a humble home, I felt out of place, but also fascinated. That universe seemed to be made of pure glamour, and everything I had once considered impossible was now within my reach. With fame came money. I began living in luxurious apartments, traveling to exotic destinations, and wearing clothes that most people only saw in magazines. Every step I took on the runway was met with applause that echoed like an addictive melody. However, something inside me began to change. The simplicity of my childhood felt more and more distant, replaced by a growing need for approval. I loved hearing compliments and seeing my face in advertisements, but deep down, I realized that the emptiness inside me was also growing. Despite this, I kept going. The pressure to stay at the top was relentless, and my focus was on fueling the glow of my career. There was no room for doubt, much less for the memories of the faith that once guided my life. Success seemed absolute, but I still didn't know the price I would pay for it. Over time, my new lifestyle began to pull me further and further away from what had once kept me grounded, my faith. Sundays, which were once reserved for family mass, were now filled with photo shoots or parties. There was always something more important to do, and my excuse was that work demanded my time and dedication. My mother, Doña Carmen, never stopped reminding me of what truly mattered. "Elena, what you have today is a gift from God. Don't abandon him, my child, or all this brightness will fade," she would say over the phone, her voice full of concern. But I ignored her. To me, her words were outdated advice from someone who didn't understand the world I lived in. At first I felt a small discomfort when I heard her voice, as if something inside me knew she was right. However, over time, I began avoiding her calls. It was easier to ignore them than to face the guilt that arose when I heard her pleas. The faith that had once been a pillar of my life now seemed like an unnecessary burden. Little by little, I stopped praying. Nights that used to end with thanks to God were now filled with parties that lasted until dawn. Prayer was replaced with fake smiles, and the peace I had felt as a child gave way to constant restlessness. My relationship with God didn't break all at once. It was like a flame that gradually faded away. Every choice that took me further from my essence seemed to dim the light within me, but I didn't notice it. I was too busy chasing the next runway, the next campaign, and God's voice grew silent. "You're changing, Elena," my mother said during a rare visit. This world is pulling you away from who you are. Her voice was firm, but it carried pain. I, however, was convinced she didn't understand. Mother, I'm fine. I need to work, to grow. This is my moment, I replied with a cold tone that still pains me to remember. The more I chased success, the more I distanced myself from the things that truly mattered. Faith, my family's love and simplicity were left behind, replaced by pride and the relentless pursuit of approval. I believed I was in control of my life, but little did I know I was losing the most important part of myself. On the outside, my life seemed perfect. I was constantly photographed for magazine covers, invited to exclusive events, and surrounded by people who seemed to adore me. I wore the best brands, frequented the most luxurious places, and gained followers who idolized my image. But inside, something was wrong. There was a growing emptiness that nothing could fill. Every night, after the runway lights went out and the applause faded, I found myself alone in luxurious hotel rooms, staring at my reflection in the mirror. There I was, with a flawlessly made-up face and lifeless eyes. I had become dependent on external validation. I needed the compliments, the likes, and the fake smiles I received at parties. My self-esteem was completely tied to my appearance and what others thought of me. The more applause I received, the more I believed I needed to be perfect to remain admired. But this pursuit of perfection was exhausting. Every photo shoot brought new pressure to meet the industry's unrealistic standards. A small mistake was criticized, and any deviation from the ideal was a cause for concern. The need to meet expectations became an invisible prison. Even surrounded by luxury and friends, I felt incredibly alone. Deep down, I knew these people weren't by my side for who I was, but for what I represented. It was a game of interests where my value depended on the status I carried. In moments of silence, doubts crept in like a persistent shadow. Why do I feel like this? Why, even with everything I've ever wanted, does it feel like something is missing? These were questions I didn't want to face, so I buried myself even deeper in glamour, parties, and social media. My life had become a mask. I showed the world an idealized version of myself, but inside, I was falling apart. What had once been a dream now felt like a gilded cage, where I was trapped by the need to appear happy and successful. As the lights shone around me, the darkness within me grew stronger. I didn't know how, but I felt that something was about to change, and it wouldn't be gentle. My world of appearances was beginning to crumble, and I would be forced to face the truth I had been hiding from everyone, including myself. To silence the emptiness consuming me, I dove even deeper into everything the world had to offer. Endless parties, alcohol, drugs, and shallow relationships. Nights that were once filled with reflection and prayer were now a blur of loud music, overflowing glasses, and unfamiliar faces. At first it all felt like the perfect escape. The pulsing sound of the parties and the colorful lights created the illusion of freedom. I believed I was living life to the fullest, that I was in control and enjoying everything success could offer. But in reality I was running away, running from myself, from my doubts, and most of all from God. I started using drugs at one of these parties, encouraged by people I called friends. "Relax, Elena. This will make you forget everything," they said, and at that moment, it seemed like exactly what I needed. The effect was immediate. For a few hours, the weight disappeared. The emptiness, though still there, was muffled by a fleeting sense of euphoria. Soon, that euphoria became a habit. Every event seemed like an excuse to repeat that destructive cycle. Alcohol flowed like water. Drugs were offered without hesitation, and the fake smiles around me only fueled my illusion that this was freedom. As for relationships, they were no more than a reflection of the superficiality dominating my life. I dated men who promised love, but only wanted the status of being with a famous model. I accepted it, thinking it was normal, but every relationship left a new mark of disappointment and hurt. On the outside, I continued to display a facade of glamour. Those around me couldn't see what was really happening. They thought I was living the height of my career, but deep down, I was merely surviving. There were moments of clarity when I questioned whether any of it was worth it. But instead of confronting those questions, I sank deeper into excess. Each party, each substance, each superficial choice felt like I was digging a deeper hole inside myself. The false sense of freedom was seductive, but with each passing day, the weight of emptiness became harder to ignore. I thought I was in control, but in reality, I was being consumed by the very things I claimed were setting me free. This life, which I believed was the fulfillment of my dreams, was actually imprisoning me in invisible chains, and I didn't know how much longer I could bear the weight. Little did I know, I was approaching the breaking point that would change my life forever. Despite everything I had, fame, money, travel, and a life many would envy, the emptiness inside me only grew. Every achievement felt less significant, every applause less satisfying. No matter how hard I tried to ignore it, something essential was missing, and that feeling followed me like a shadow, even in my brightest moments. On silent nights, when the parties ended and the lights faded, I found myself alone in luxurious hotel rooms. It was in those moments that the weight of my reality became unbearable. The silence, which should have brought rest, confronted me with questions I didn't want to answer. Why do I feel like this? Why does it seem like I'm losing something I don't know how to recover? I would sit on the edge of the bed, surrounded by expensive clothes scattered on the floor and jewelry gleaming on the nightstand. The luxury around me contrasted with the darkness I felt inside. My reflection in the mirror showed a seemingly perfect woman, but when I looked into my own eyes, all I saw was exhaustion and deep sadness. There were times when I tried to justify that emptiness. It's just exhaustion, I told myself. I'm living life intensely, and that comes with a price. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. Something inside me was broken, and no success, no achievement seemed capable of fixing it. On social media, I showcased a perfect life. I posted photos of my travels, events, and dazzling outfits. People praised me, calling me inspirational. But little did they know that behind each photo was a lost soul, desperately trying to fill a void that none of those things could satisfy. One of those nights, sitting on the floor of a room overlooking a brightly lit city, a tear rolled down my face. It surprised me because I had grown used to hiding my emotions, even from myself. But in that moment, the pain seemed to have broken through my defenses. I had everything the world valued, but I felt like I had absolutely nothing that truly mattered. My soul was crying out for something I couldn't identify, something that felt lost long ago. The emptiness wasn't just a feeling. It was like a dark hole that grew larger every day, consuming everything around me. And although I didn't want to admit it, I knew I was moving further and further away from the only source that could fill it. Those lonely nights were a warning, a silent call I kept ignoring. But soon, it would be impossible to escape that truth. The emptiness was about to bring me to a breaking point where I would have to face what was really happening within me. It was a sunny afternoon, and I had just finished a long photo shoot. Exhausted and impatient, I decided I needed time away from everything. I got into my car, a luxury vehicle I had recently purchased, and decided to drive to a beach house a few hours away. I wanted a weekend surrounded by music, friends, and parties, believing it would fill the emptiness consuming me. The road was winding, lined with hills and trees gently swaying in the breeze. With the windows down, The warm air brushed against my face, and I felt a false sense of freedom. The music played loudly and my thoughts were far away. As I sped down the road, I was texting friends, planning the evening's festivities. Everything happened in the blink of an eye. As I glanced at my phone, I lost control of the car. The sound of tires skidding on the asphalt echoed in my mind like a warning that something terrible was about to happen. I tried to brake, but it was too late. The car veered off the road, tumbling down a hillside covered in trees. The impact was devastating. I heard the sound of metal twisting, glass shattering, and felt my body slammed against the seat belt. When the car finally came to a stop, everything was silent, a haunting silence, heavy with an indescribable weight. I was motionless, my body overcome with sharp pain. My eyes could barely open, and everything around me seemed distorted. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. It felt as if I were trapped, not just physically, but spiritually. In that moment, something began to change. Suddenly, the physical pain gave way to a sensation of falling, but it wasn't an ordinary fall. It felt as if my soul were being pulled into a dark place, an infinite void with no end. Everything around me turned black, and time seemed to stand still. My mind was in turmoil, trying to comprehend what was happening. That's when I realized I was no longer in the world I knew. The sensation of losing control, of being completely vulnerable, was overwhelming. From that moment on, I knew I was about to face something that would change my life forever. The journey I was about to embark on was not physical, but spiritual, a profound experience that would take me to the darkest depths of human existence, and at the same time, reveal the truth I had ignored for so long. When I opened my eyes, I realized I was no longer in the car or on the road. The environment around me was one of oppressive darkness, but it wasn't ordinary darkness. It was a total absence of light, of peace, of hope. The air was dense, hard to breathe, and a suffocating heat seemed to envelop everything. Each breath was a struggle, as if the very atmosphere conspired against me. In the distance I heard screams, not ordinary screams, but cries filled with indescribable pain, an agony that went beyond the physical. These sounds echoed from every direction, piercing my soul and exposing every fear and regret I had tried to hide. The darkness began to shift, revealing hunched figures bound in chains, as if carrying an invisible weight. When I looked closer, a devastating shock hit me. I recognized some of them. They were people I had known in my life, co-workers, acquaintances from parties, even a man I had been in a superficial relationship with. They were all there, trapped in eternal suffering. The faces that were once familiar were now distorted by pain and despair. Their eyes, which had once sparkled with arrogance or indifference, now pleaded for help. I wanted to scream, to call out to them, to do something, but I realized I had no voice. It was as if I too was trapped, unable to interact, only able to watch this scene of torment. Each one of them seemed caught in their own personal condemnation. I saw a model I had competed with for years. She was surrounded by flames that didn't burn her skin, but tormented her soul. Her hands reached out into the void, as if searching for salvation that no longer existed. As I looked around, a terrifying truth began to form within me. That place was a reflection of the choices I had made. Every decision driven by pride, vanity, and selfishness had pushed me closer to that abyss. And now I was there, facing the consequences of a life I thought was perfect, but had taken me far from God. A malevolent presence loomed around me. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it in every fiber of my being. It was an oppressive force that fed on suffering and darkness. It seemed to be watching me, waiting for the right moment to pull me further into that torment. I wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. Every step I tried to take seemed to drag me deeper into the abyss. The invisible chains binding the other souls began to weigh on me as well. In that moment, I realized I was completely lost, trapped in a place where hope didn't exist. It was there, in the midst of that darkness and despair, that I finally understood the weight of my choices. All the glamour, fame, and riches that once seemed so important were now meaningless. My heart was filled with regret, but it seemed too late to turn back. But then, in the depths of that abyss, a faint light began to appear. It was weak, distant, but unlike anything else in that place. And with it came a voice, powerful, full of authority, yet filled with love. That light would mark the beginning of something that would change the course of my life forever. In the midst of that oppressive darkness, when all seemed lost, a light began to emerge in the distance. At first it was just a barely perceptible point, but as it drew closer, I felt something I hadn't felt since arriving in that place. Hope. The light was unlike anything we know in the physical world. It wasn't just brightness, it was warmth, peace, and at the same time, a powerful force that seemed to penetrate every part of me. It felt as if that light knew exactly who I was, every mistake, every wrong choice, and yet it did not condemn me. Suddenly a voice resounded, seeming to come from everywhere at once. It was strong yet filled with love, as if it carried the weight of eternity. The voice called my name, Elena. For the first time, I felt truly seen. Not as a model, a celebrity, or an image, but as who I truly was, a broken soul desperate for redemption. You do not belong to this place, the voice continued, piercing deep into my being. You were created for a greater purpose, but your choices have brought you here. In that instant, scenes from my life began to form around me. It was like watching a movie, but each scene brought deep pain because it revealed my failures, my selfish decisions, and how I had rejected God's love. I saw the moments when I ignored my mother's advice, the times I put pride above what was right, and how my choices not only hurt me, but also others around me. I felt shame, an overwhelming shame that made me want to disappear. But before despair could consume me again, the voice spoke once more. This is not the end. You have a choice. I am giving you another chance, but you must seek me with all your heart. The words echoed in my soul, bringing a mix of relief and responsibility. It felt as if a door had been opened, but crossing it was up to me. Then the light began to envelop me. It wasn't just something I saw, it was something I felt. It penetrated the deepest parts of me, washing away guilt, fear, and pain. I have a purpose for your life, the voice continued, now closer, clearer. You must return and share what you have seen so that others may be saved. Show them that no matter how far someone has fallen, my love can reach them. Tears began to stream down my face. I didn't know how to respond, but within me, a certainty began to take shape. I needed to change. I needed to leave behind everything that had brought me to that place and fully surrender myself to God. Before I could say anything, the light completely enveloped me, and the darkness around me vanished. The sense of despair was replaced by an indescribable peace, as if I were being held in a heavenly embrace. In that moment, I knew my life would never be the same. Suddenly, I felt a pull, as if something were drawing me back to the physical world. The light was still with me, but now began to fade, and I knew it was time to return. My heart was filled with a new hope, and for the first time in years, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I slowly opened my eyes, and everything around me felt disoriented. Fluorescent lights shone brightly above me, and the constant beeping of monitors filled the room. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. My body ached, and a sense of extreme weakness overtook me. Then I realized I was in a hospital. My mind was still processing everything that had happened. the images of hell, the divine light, and the voice filled with love were still vivid in my memory. It wasn't a dream or a hallucination. I knew with absolute certainty that I had been rescued by God's mercy. As I tried to move, I heard a familiar voice by my side. It was soft, filled with emotion and faith. "Thank God, my girl, you're alive." It was my mother, Dona Carmen. When I turned my head to see her, her eyes were filled with tears and her hands clutched mine tightly, as if afraid of losing me again. She was kneeling by the bedside, with a rosary entwined between her fingers, and the marks of tears were still visible on her face. "I prayed for you every day, Elena. Even when you were far from God, I never stopped asking Him to bring you back." Her voice trembled, but it was full of gratitude. I couldn't hold back my tears. I looked at her and whispered weakly, "Mom, I saw hell. But God gave me another chance." Each word felt heavy, but it also brought relief. She gently embraced me, as if my fragile body might break, and began to pray aloud, thanking God for my life. In that moment I felt a warmth in my heart, as if the divine light that had found me was still with me, surrounding me with its presence. As I listened to my mother, I began to reflect on everything I had experienced. All the wrong choices, the moments I ignored her warnings and God's guidance, and how my vanity and pride had pulled me away from what truly mattered. I realized that I wasn't alive by chance. God had given me a second chance, and I knew I needed to use it for something greater. In the days that followed as I recovered, my mother's presence was constant. She held my hand, read the Bible beside me, and prayed incessantly. Every word of Scripture seemed to speak directly to me, as if God was reaffirming that my time on earth was not yet over. Looking at her, I realized that her prayers and her faith had been crucial to my survival. Her dedication and love were like a beacon that guided me back, even when I was lost. And at that moment I decided I would never again stray from God or her. Waking up in the hospital wasn't just physical. It was a spiritual rebirth, the beginning of a journey to rebuild my life and fulfill the purpose that had been revealed to me. While still in the hospital, I had time to deeply reflect on everything I had experienced. Every memory of hell, every word from the divine voice, and every prayer from my mother echoed in my mind. One thing was clear. My life couldn't continue the way it was. Something needed to change, and this time, it wouldn't be a superficial change, but a complete transformation. The first decision I made was to leave my modeling career. I knew that world, with all its glamour, excesses, and illusions, was what had taken me so far from God. I called my agent and announced my departure from the industry. He tried to convince me otherwise, talking about million-dollar contracts and new opportunities, but my response was firm. I can't live like this anymore. This is the end. Leaving my career wasn't easy. That life, as empty as it was, had been all I knew for years. It was comfortable, even though it was destructive. But this time, my heart was determined. I no longer wanted to seek validation in flashes and applause, but in God's presence. In addition to leaving my career, I knew I needed to reconcile with the people I had hurt along the way. My mother was the first. I asked for forgiveness for all the times I had ignored her, for her tears and worries that I had treated with indifference. She hugged me tightly and with eyes full of love said, "God has already forgiven you, my daughter, and so have I." Next, I reached out to friends who had tried to help me, but whom I had pushed away. I apologized to those I had belittled for not fitting into the lifestyle I had chosen. I also contacted colleagues from the industry, some of the same people I had seen in my vision of hell. As difficult as it was, I shared my testimony with them in the hope that they too might find their way back to God. But the most important reconciliation was with God. I began to pray again, at first with hesitant words, like a child learning to speak. I picked up the Bible my mother always left by my bedside and started reading it verse by verse. Every word seemed full of meaning, as if it had been written directly for me. With each prayer, each request for forgiveness, I felt the weight of the past being lifted from my shoulders. It wasn't an instant process. It was one day at a time. But with every step, I felt my heart being restored. God was shaping me again, not as the woman the world expected me to be, but as the person He had created me to be. Letting go of my old lifestyle was difficult, but each renunciation brought me closer to true peace. And for the first time in years, I felt that my life finally had purpose, not a purpose based on fame or material success, but on something eternal, something greater than I could ever imagine. With my life transformed, I understood that God had not only rescued me, but also called me to a new mission, to share my story and bring hope to those who, like me, were lost. I knew my testimony wasn't just mine. It had the power to impact other lives and show that no matter how far someone has fallen, there is always a way back to God. My first opportunity came at a small church in the village where I grew up. The pastor, a friend of my mother's, invited me to share my experience during a service. I remember being nervous, my hands trembling as I stepped up to the pulpit. I looked at the people, many of them familiar faces, and took a deep breath. I began to tell my story, from a childhood filled with faith to my plunge into excesses and finally, my transformative experience with God. As I spoke, I saw tears in many eyes. Some people nodded as if recognizing parts of their own lives in my story. At the end, some approached me, thanking me for my courage in sharing what God had done in me. In that moment, I knew my mission was just beginning. Soon, invitations came from other churches, schools, and even events in large auditoriums. I also began sharing my testimony in interviews and on social media. With every opportunity, I remembered that the glory wasn't mine but God's, who had rescued me from the abyss. If this testimony touched your heart and you wish to support this mission of bringing hope and transformation, consider leaving a super thanks. Every gesture of gratitude helps me continue sharing this message of faith and life change. Thank you for being part of this journey and for allowing God to work through you. My journey has shown me that it's never too late to change, never too late to reconnect with God. No matter how far you've strayed or how heavy the burden you carry, God's love is deeper than any abyss and more powerful than any mistake. If you're feeling lost, empty, or trapped in a cycle that seems endless, know that there is hope. God is waiting for you with open arms, ready to transform your life just as He transformed mine. Remember, it's not the riches of this world that bring peace, but reconciliation with the Creator. The emptiness we feel can only be filled by Him. And if you're hearing this message, believe me, it's not by chance. No matter how far you've wandered, God is always willing to bring you back. True peace, true purpose, and true life can only be found in Him. May my story serve as a reminder that it's never too late to start again. May God bless you.